Today, he's here to share how companies can be more profitable and human oriented. Please welcome Dr. Bruno Cignacco. Well,
Thank
good
you very
morning to you,
much.
Bruno.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for inviting me. I feel very honored to be here. Thank you.
My pleasure. We were just talking about the United Kingdom, and I had lived there in the in the winter of 2002
Okay.
through to the summer of 2003, and they had a heat wave when I was there. And
Oh,
people are saying, this is a heat wave, this is a heat wave. And I thought to myself, it's 25 degrees. You know, a heat wave in Australia was 45 degrees. And they said it's hot and there's thousands of people dying in Europe. And I said, but it's only 25 degrees. And
it's
then I
very hot.
realized that 25 degrees there in the northern hemisphere is very different to 25 degrees in the southern hemisphere. And it was hot. There was no way where to escape. A lot of the homes and businesses didn't have air conditioning. So 25 in that thin atmosphere was a very different experience. And I understood why they called it a heat wave.
I agree. Here in summer, we have only very few days that are hot during that season, and this is very uncommon. It's getting less common over time because maybe the climate change. We don't know, but this is generally very cold. So you are right to say that 25 is very cold for the region.
Mm. In terms of business, and I know we're going to touch on this topic today, there's a different environment in the UK. And when I got there in New Year's Eve of 2002, I came across this gloomy weather. And it was dark when I woke up in the morning, and it was still just dark around 8 or 9 a.m. And then it was grey throughout the day. And then by 4 o'clock, it was dark. And then we're in darkness until the next day. And at the start, I really didn't notice how it impacted my personality. But I realized a lot of people had what was called seasonal effectiveness disorder. And the more that I built relationships with people in the United Kingdom over 20 years, I noticed that that seasonal effectiveness disorder was almost predictable. The season would change, and at the end of the year, crossing over from one year into the next, the climate would change, but the emotional temperature also changed of the individual. And it was a problem that I had never seen in this part of the world. And then I learned it was seasonal effectiveness disorder. And in terms of business climate, it definitely changed their attitude or their angle of approach to business, which was quite fascinating.
Yes, well, yes, many people get depressed during the cold seasons. Here, I have many colleagues and friends of mine that get depressed, and this affects the mood in general, not only in close circles, but also in business. And I observe that here many entrepreneurs have a very pessimistic attitude toward the future. They are not very hopeful. In some cases, here there is a lot of discussion on politics and the negative side of politics, politicians in general. So this could affect the mood, for example, during the work days, in the work environment. But companies here are not different from the companies in other parts of the world in a way that there are generally two categories of companies that I observe here in the UK and also I observe in other parts of the world, regardless of the climate and the weather and so on. That I observe that there are companies that are much more profit oriented, means that they're only looking for money, sales, profit, market share, stock price. And then you have the company that have a much broader approach on business that I observe also in the UK, but also in other parts of the world that are much what I call human oriented, that they are focusing not only on profit, which is important for business survival and business growth and success, but also for they're looking for to bring about a positive impact on different stakeholders. Stakeholders are individuals and groups with interest in an organization. For example, they want to generate a positive impact on communities, on customers, benefiting employees within the workplace, also develop long-term agreements, mutually profitable agreement with suppliers, with business partners. So, and this company have a different perspective on business. They don't look for profit by all means, but they try to develop a strong bond with different stakeholders so that they can benefit each other on a regular basis.
Mm. I worked with Emirates Airline, and when I joined, it was 2008. And it was such an interesting experience because coming from Australia, I had good businesses invest in me before. And so the first really good training I got was in a real estate called Australian Real Estate. And my uncle was one of the business partners. And from the day that I joined, I was trained. The training actually even started before I joined. When I applied for the job, it wasn't guaranteed. Although it was my uncle, it wasn't guaranteed. He welcomed me in. He showed me the business, and at the end of the first interview, he gave me a book, and it was called "The Richest Man in Babylon." And he said, "Go away and read the book. Once you read the book, come back." So I came back, and the next interview was about what I learned in the book. And then at the end of the second interview, he told me more about the business, then gave me another book called Real Estate Mistakes. And he said, go away and read the book. And so I read the book, and then I came back for the third interview, and he asked me about the book. And what I realized that he was educating me before I even got to the business, but he was making sure it was a good match. It wasn't just about the business finding a new salesperson, it was finding the right job for the right person. And then throughout my career, I had phenomenal training. And then I went to other businesses and I didn't get the training. But then when I went to Emirates Airline, I realized that they had an entire ecosystem of learning. And I went in as the old Daniel, and 4 years later, I came out as a totally different Daniel. And the amount of investment that the company put into me was mind boggling. The learning didn't stop from day one. And what I felt was Emirates, as one of the most profitable airlines in the world, also made a significant investment into their people. And it was almost like an open checkbook. The learning didn't stop. And it was such a wonderful experience.
Well, this is a very interesting case because this practical case matches the scientific research on training and training in the workplace. There is an interesting scientific study that observed that when you support employees on a regular basis, for example, with training, with mentoring, coaching, and any other type of initiative that help employees enhance their natural skill and also develop new skills, in those cases, and when you make these employees feel safe at work, they feel that they count, they feel appreciated. In these workplaces where employees also can give their views and employees can be opinionated and suggest new ideas. These type of places, the researchers call psychologically safe workplaces. In these workplaces, like the one that you mentioned, that consider training as an investment, not as a cost. In this type of workplaces, some researchers observe that employees tend to be more happy, more satisfied, and when employees are more happy, more satisfied, more motivated, they tend to serve customer much more effectively because
Mm.
employees that are happy make customer happier. So this means and make a lot of sense. And customer, when they are happier, they are more prone to become committed and loyal to the company. And in this workplace, it's also because employees feel so supported and they're treated in such a compassionate way, they tend to be lower turnover, lower absenteeism, lower stress level, which implies lower medical costs, but also more motivation, more creativity, more innovation, and this impact positively on the bottom line, which
Mm.
means profit and sales. So this means that this makes a lot of sense that you said this company has an open checkbook on training. However, they were very successful economically speaking. And this is not a contradiction because the most important resource in all of my talks, I repeat the same phrase. I'm kind of tired of saying this. The most important resource in any organization is not artificial intelligence, it's not technology, it's not money, it's not information, it's the human being. It's a meta resource, it's a resource that help companies generate other resources. So meta means above. So this means that help companies generate other resources. For example, new business models, innovative products and services, new systems, new policies, new ways of interacting with customers. So what the company did by investing in you and help you develop your natural skill and help you get additional skills, the company knew that this investment will have positive returns because you feel supported. They are not only satisfying your economic needs, for example, by paying a good salary, they are satisfying your emotional needs. You feel supported, you feel understood, you feel respected, and you feel that you can grow and you can become much more skillful, more competent, but also you can contribute to a meaningful mission, the company mission that is not only getting more sales, but also helping people satisfy their needs. For example, if this is an airline, well, having the most comfortable flights, having the best customer service, you are improving in a direct or indirect way people's lives. So they are making a positive dent on.
Bruno, can you just check your sound for a moment? Your sound dropped out. Okay, we're back. I think. Give me a hello. Let's see if that sound's coming through.
Can you hear me?
Okay, we're back.
You are back.
If you can just go back 20 seconds for me.
I can go 20 seconds. No, I was saying that companies that invest a lot on different stakeholders, they are generous with the stakeholder. This means that they're giving instead of receiving. Many companies are focusing only on receiving. They want more sales, they want more productivity, they want higher quality, they want more market share. Instead, companies that have a broader view on business, they also try to give, for example, give more training to employees, give incentive to customers, and also, for example, giving free training. For example, the customer is buying a computer from this company, they're giving free training. This means free gift to this customer for them to enjoy. Well, these companies that have a generous attitude towards stakeholders tend to be more successful and they tend to have a better brand image. The most important resources I mentioned is the human being. When you nurture relationship with different stakeholders on a regular basis and you develop relationships that are mutually profitable with these stakeholders tend to support the company in return. When you care for employees, these employees care for your company. When you care for customers, this customer will leave positive reviews and recommend your product to other customers. When you care for the community will have a positive image of your company. So this is what I call the law of reciprocity. You give, you nurture relationship, and you are supported by this stakeholder in return.
With Emirates Airline, the moment that we applied for the job, it was a wonderful experience. So I remember for me, I was driving over the Sydney Harbour Bridge. And as I was driving over the Sydney Harbour Bridge, there was this white high rise building, and in big red letters, it said Emirates. And that very day, I went to the newspaper, and in the newspaper, it said, "We're hiring cabin crew." So I quickly rang the telephone number. I said, "I'm interested in this position." They said, "Well, we're interviewing a week from now." And so, even for the job interview, they had prepared me of what to expect on the day. And when I got there on the day, there was education. It wasn't like a job interview like we see on some of these reality TV shows. It was an educational process. They educated you about Dubai, they educated you about the airline. And it was almost that we were qualifying together. It wasn't me just saying, I want this job. It was the company also saying, This is what the job looks like. This is the reality. And let's see if it's a fit for your personality and style. And so we went through round one of the interviews, and it probably started with 150 people. By the end of the day, they had probably got the list from 150 down to about 30. And at the end of the day, those 30 other people in the room, I looked around and I went, most of these people I would feel comfortable working with. And I was already confident in their selection process. By the end of the second day, when we came back and we did other interviews, they had cut 30 down to about 15. And when I looked at those 15 people in the room, I went, this is the cream of the crop. Of course, I was there, I was the cream. But everybody else, I was like, you know what? These are the top performers. They've got a certain look about them, a certain charm, a certain characteristic. And I believe these final 15 are the people that I would really like to work with. And there wasn't anybody in that top 15 that I didn't personally like. There was nothing in them that I went, oh, wow, this is a turn off. It was like, well, this is a real turn on. I could have a career with these people. From that stage, once we were given the job opportunity, about 6 weeks later, they replied and said, congratulations, you've made it through to the final rounds. There's a telephone interview. And then after that, we'll then begin the onboarding process. And then the education continued. And then when I got to Dubai, the onboarding was mapped out and it was executed perfectly. I got onto the aircraft in Sydney, and the cabin crew said, Daniel, welcome. Welcome to the family. I flew over, they took care of me. I landed in Dubai, and there was a big sign, Daniel Tolson, come this way. They then took me from the airport to headquarters. I got to headquarters. They gave me an envelope of cash and said, we know that at the start, most people don't have a lot of money. Here's some salary in advance so you don't have to worry about money. Now let's go to the hotel. You go to the hotel and you're in a hotel apartment. There's a fridge, a washing machine, all of your utensils there, brand new bed sheets, brand new cooking equipment. And they say, don't worry about shopping or setting up the house. We've done it for you. The next day, we'll pick you up on a bus. We'll take you to headquarters. We'll do an orientation. We'll give you a uniform. And the learning started. And everything that they promised, they delivered on. And it was just very predictable and it was executed perfectly. And that's important to me because what I learned in business is that about 90% of new employees complain about the onboarding process. I remember when I've started many sales jobs before, like many salespeople, you get a 3-step sales process. Uh, there's the door, there's your product, go make sales. And that's how it is for most people. But for me, it was a totally different experience.
Well, I want to take your example because this is we can match this specific example with the design of the framework that I use in my book, The Art of Compassionate Business, that is about a wide range of needs that all stakeholders have. For example, employees. You mentioned that they were very supportive and they were emotionally assisting you in different ways, making you feel valued, appreciated, respected. This is what I call emotional needs. Most companies tend to dismiss employees' emotional needs. They believe that the employees, because they are being paid a salary, that's it. But the salary only covers economic needs. You mentioned also economic needs there that were also met fully made by the company by offering you accommodation, well, food, and also all type of facility for you to have a good time there in that city. Well, so this means that there are economic needs that need to be met by companies, emotional needs, but then mental needs, the need for stimulation, the need for novelty. Well, they give you training on a regular basis to enhance your skills, to develop new skills. This company was meeting not only the economic needs, the emotional needs, but also mental needs and social needs too, because during the interviewing process, you were relating to potential colleagues, you were connecting to one another. And what I see that many companies do not meet employee social need. Why? Because they put employees in isolation. This means that they're doing job without interacting with their colleagues. In some cases, they feel lonely, they feel kind of solitary, they're not related to others. And we are social beings by nature. Some people are much more extroverted, the other are much more introverts. But the idea is that we have to understand that we're all social beings. So this means that this company is a perfect example in a way that was meeting economic needs, accommodation, salary, and so on, emotional needs, recognition, appreciation, support, but also mental needs, training, regular training, investing in your development, and also social needs. It's a good example, but it's not the common example. Most of the company focus on economic needs because they feel that paying a salary that should be above the minimum legal wage is enough, and that's it. An employee have no other needs. But at the end, employees and any other stakeholder, also customers, suppliers, we are human beings with we call technically speaking multidimensional. We have an emotional side, and we have a social side, and we have the mental side, and you have this economic needs too.
The other needs that humans have are sexual needs. And Emirates Airline also provided sexual education for the new cabin crew. And it was fascinating because no company that I've worked with has ever talked about the sexual needs of the individual. And why it was important is that when you go to Dubai as part of getting your visa, you have to have an AIDS and HIV test done. But in the Muslim country, there's no promotion of safe sex. Sex is for a married couple, but it's not promoted like it is in the Western world. Like in Australia, there's pornography available at all the news agencies. There's soft pornography on the TV after 8 p.m. It's always in your face. But in a Muslim country, that's out of sight. So what tends to happen is people who move to the Middle East, they have an AIDS test, they have an HIV test, and now they just assume that nobody has AIDS or HIV. And they assume that nobody has any sexual transmitted diseases. But the company knew the pattern of the cabin crew. You're coming over, you're under 30, your hormones are running wild, and there's going to be a pattern of women falling pregnant in a Muslim country, which is haram. There's also going to be sex before marriage, which is haram, and there's going to be sexually transmitted diseases. So, as part of the onboarding, they took us into an auditorium and they spoke about sexuality. They educated us on protection. And I thought that was phenomenal because I was a little bit older than most of the others. I was 28 at that stage, and there was new joiners at the age of 21. I had some life experience they hadn't. And I believe that because of that, people were more aware. They knew how to protect themselves in Dubai sexually, but also on their layovers. No other company I've ever seen that, and I've never heard of it. But I think even that is just so important.
It's good. It's good because they care for the whole human being. Not
Yes.
only the emotional aspect, but also the physical and mental aspect. Good, good, good. I heard other cases of companies, and I know some cases of companies that they care not only for the physical health, but also for the mental health. For example, some companies here in the UK, they have services, counseling services, so free for employees. So this means that the employee have some, for example, traumas from the past, or anxiety, or obsessions, for example, compulsion, or any type of mental disorders. These employees can take time off and can be referred to the company's counselor that will keep everything confidential and also will provide them with the best assistance. So what you tell me is an interesting example that is caring for the physical health. I saw a specific example of mental health here and in other parts, but it's interesting because they don't compartmentalize this employee. It's not only the role. I talk about the importance of the human being in my research, and the role is only a very tiny part of the human being, because the human being includes physical health, mental health, emotional health, and many companies only focus on the role. I saw I give you an example without mentioning the companies when I talk about the negative example. not to get in legal problems. But the idea there are some companies, well now, that they don't allow employees to discuss at work with colleagues, even during break times, anything that is related to emotional topics, emotional issues. So this means that these companies are hyper rational, means only you can talk about plans, budget, cost, revenues. But if you have any problem, emotional problem that could be related to your family or your relationship or your health or challenges at home, there are not policies, but there are implicit rules that these topics are off limits. So this means that employees become, when they come at work, this is a sanitized version of the employee that leave all the emotion aside. What is a fallacy? Because at the end, we're emotional beings, we are physical beings, we are spiritual beings, mental beings. So I like this approach of the company in a way that they care for the holistic aspect of the employee, not only for the role, the function, how the performance, but they talk about other topics and the approach and the support employees regarding other important aspects.
Emirates Airline had an employee assistance program. And when I was part of the cabin crew, there was 17,500 employees as cabin crew. There was around about 60,000 in total in the company. And we had more than 2,000 people in the employee assistance program. 2,000.
A lot.
The company had trained 2,000 people, certified them in peer support. And the company was always setting a new target. So as they recruited more employees and more people resigned and people of the employee assistance program resigned, they would constantly recruit. So it was always this ongoing internal recruitment for more people in peer support. So they would train you in the employee assistance program. You would learn skills for peer support, psychology techniques, emotional intelligence techniques, coaching techniques. They would pay to learn, and then they would reward you with additional cheap tickets to fly anywhere in the world. So, for example, if every year the company gave me a return ticket back to Australia, you might pay $3,000 for that ticket today. That was gifted to you, and all you had to pay was like 10%. So I could go to Australia and back for maybe $200. The other 90% was paid for by the company. So that was one of the rewards. And it was always being scaled. They didn't stop recruiting in that department. And then you could go from peer support and then you could go to critical incident stress management. And critical incident stress management was more about the customer, it was the external stakeholder. So Emirates Airline understood the reality and they said, there's always a chance that there's going to be an accident, whether it be on ground or in the air. It could be a crash landing. It could be a death on the aircraft. It could be a fire. And so Emirates Airline always had a target of recruiting people for critical incident stress management. And we could be deployed to go to any region of the world at any time if there was an accident. And the training was ongoing. So even that skill there, I love coaching. I love the topics of emotional intelligence. For me, that was a life skill. And I know that with that training, I'll be able to use those skills now in my business, which I do. But if there's an external accident anywhere in the future, I'm already trained. And these were the things that they were doing on their paycheck. And then again, you get another free ticket. So now you get 2 free tickets around the world because you've become a part of this, plus the education. They were always thinking about the people.
Very interesting. And the example that you gave, like, for example, be trained for emergency cases, we call this transferable skills. This means that you don't use only in that sector, but you can use in any sector, because at the end, you are always prone to emergency cases. So maybe they're not exactly the one that you were trained, but you have some skill to be applied there. This is quite interesting because the company there is not only thinking about what can be applied in that sector and this specific organization, but trying to enhance the whole human being. So this means that they don't consider only the human being as the role, but the human being in their growth and personal and professional development. What is a quite interesting example that you're giving me, because the idea is that this company is validating the statement that I said before, that is the most important resource in any organization is a human being. It's not all the rest of the resources that many companies get confused, such as artificial intelligence or technology or information. By enhancing your skills, they were more able to help you harness your own capabilities, your talents, and get you much more motivated and much more aligned with the company's business mission. And obviously, it has a positive effect on the economic result, because also at the end, let's think about this. When company is very generous, like in this case that you mentioned, giving, according to research, this create an imbalance. When companies give a lot to stakeholders, they create a positive imbalance. People are receiving a lot and they feel indebted with this organization. You as an employee say, oh, this is such a supportive company. I feel indebted by default to give something back, to reciprocate, to be committed, to not only work by the book, but to work a bit over time, to help them meet the deadlines, to cooperate with the colleagues. This is generating also a very good work atmosphere, work climate. This means that when employees feel at ease and they don't feel stressed, they feel supported, they're more prone to use their creative skills, their discerning skills, and suggest new ideas, cooperate with colleagues. This also is more prone to generate a trust-based work environment where people cooperate and share resources. The opposite happens when companies are only focused on profit. Let's say, okay, training is not important, employee development is not important, employees' health is not important. Let's focus only on getting as much profit as possible. In this case, this type of companies that are a big majority of companies tend to generate, instead of a trust-based workplace, they tend to generate a competitive workplace, but competitive in a negative sense. This means that the employees, instead of cooperating with one another, they try to outpace their colleagues. They tend to keep their resources instead of sharing resources. They tend to work against each other instead of working jointly. So, and this brings profit down, sales down, market share down, all customer services very negative. Why? Because they're not working in a very collaborative way. So for the reason, investment in the human being is the best investment. It has unbounded returns. So unlimited returns in a way, because the concept of reciprocity, the concept of indebtedness, when you give, this applies also to customer. You give a lot to customer, what do you expect? If you give a lot to customer, will they leave a negative review? No, they will leave a very positive review and will bring other customers to enjoy the multiple benefits. And this is counterintuitive, but you see so many examples of companies that are acting the opposite way, because what is the mentality? I said, no, we have to reduce cost. Everything is a cost. And this means that salary, paying is high salary, it will be higher cost. Paying training, higher cost. This will reduce our profit. But they don't think, or for example, having more people in the customer service department increase the cost. But they don't think about the indirect benefit that you have of these items that are not cost, they are investment in the stakeholder, investment in employees, investment in better customer service, and so on. They don't think, because the reality is, and I have in some cases say something so obvious when I'm training companies, that is, companies cannot succeed without the stakeholders. I repeat, it sounds so obvious, but companies forget this. Cannot succeed without the stakeholder. Company cannot succeed without employees, without customers, without suppliers, without community members. You cannot force them to cooperate with your company. But if you are generous with these customer, employees, suppliers, community, if you are supportive, if you are compassionate, if you are kind, you care for them authentically, they are more prone to be on your side.
mm,
unconditionally. Why? Because they care for you in return, because you
mm,
care for them before. So you care for them firstly, and they're more prone to cooperate spontaneously, without you forcing them, without you manipulating them. And this is so important because this can only happen when companies are not solely oriented toward profit. Because if
mm,
you're oriented toward profit and you take this to the extreme of the spectrum, this means that only profit matters. You, in many cases, you try to achieve profit by unethical means. For example,
mm,
exploiting employees. For example, deceiving customers. For example, polluting the environment. And this is extreme, but there are
mm,
many nuances in the middle. And this is the worst, it's a negative investment. Why? Because you are shooting on your foot. You are going against a stakeholder that you need them to cooperate. And how you expect them to cooperate if you are treating them in a disrespectful and unsupportive and an unkind way? Why they will cooperate? You cannot
mm,
keep them. So am I clear? So this is so obvious, but the example that you gave me is a good example that many companies should take as an example to emulate, to imitate, but they are not easy to find example in society. In my book included many examples, hundreds of examples, but if you see, you will find that it's more easy to discover that the companies around you are more focused or mostly focused on profit and not
mm.
having a broader perspective that includes positive impact on society, social impact, positive social impact on employees, customers, and positive environmental impact.
Mm, mm. In leadership, there's a bit of a myth that the crisis makes the leader, but the reality is, from my perspective, is that the crisis reveals the true characteristics of the leader because you see them under pressure. And for my experience with Emirates Airline, I had the best experience. Mine was almost a perfect experience. But my wife's experience with the company was on the opposite side of the scale, and it was the worst. And it was the worst because she had an accident on the aircraft. So she was flying from London Gatwick to Dubai. She fell over on the aircraft. She fractured her knee in 5 places. And what we saw here was the reality of Emirates Airline when it came to dealing with a crisis. And when they came to deal with that crisis, it was one of the best crisis interventions that I have seen. And I say to my wife today, I said, if you had that accident anywhere else in the world, you would have never have recovered like you did. So she had an accident on the aircraft. As soon as the aircraft landed, there was an ambulance ready for her to take her directly to the best hospital. I met her at the hospital. We met with a surgeon. We spoke to the surgeon. We agreed with the surgeon and the company that the operation that they wanted to do immediately wasn't the best. And the company said, we agree with you. Tomorrow, let's take you to another hospital. So my wife had a night of recovery. The next day, we went back to another hospital. We met with another surgeon, and the surgeon said, I believe this is the operation you should have. And we said to the company, this is what they're recommending. And they said, go for it. Just it's an open checkbook. Open checkbook. They checked us in to the best hospital in Dubai. It was a 5-star hospital. It was like being inside of a hotel. There was a butler, silver tray service in the hospital. They took her in, gave her the best operation that money could buy right there and then. And then after that, they provided 6 months of non stop rehabilitation, the best physiotherapy, the best mental health care, the best support. They continued to pay her. They continued to provide her accommodation and transport. And after 6 months, we went back to the doctor, and the doctor said, the operation's a success, but now we're going to have another surgery because there's things that have happened in the knee that have to be corrected to avoid a permanent disability. So we spoke to the company, we spoke to the management, and they said, open checkbook. Can you get the operation here in Dubai? No, we can't. Where can we get it? the next best surgeon is in the United Kingdom. So the company flew my wife business class to United Kingdom because she can't bend her legs, so she's got to keep it straight. We go and meet the best surgeon in London at the best at the best hospital. And then they also sent me across. They said, Daniel, you go with her to support her. You fly over, we'll give you time off. So we met the doctors, we flew back, and they said, yep, this is okay, open checkbook. But she also needed to stay in the United Kingdom whilst she had the operation because she can't fly back immediately because of blood clots. So they flew her back in business class. They put her up in the Marriott hotel, 5-star hotel, for a month to recover. They also gave me a month off work to be with her and support her mentally and emotionally. So we both lived at Heathrow for a month in the Marriott 5-star hotel. And then they brought us back. And then we had to have another operation. And they did the same thing over and over again. And it was just an open checkbook. And it was a wonderful experience. And when she had mental health problems because of the PTSD, they gave her the best psychologists. And so, although she had the worst experience in terms of having an accident, the company had revealed itself in the crisis. And that intervention, it might not have been 10 out of 10, but what they did wouldn't have happened anywhere else in the world. And even after 2.5 years, 2.5 years of surgery and rehabilitation, the checkbook was open. She had accommodation, she had salary. And even when it came to the end of her contract, they kept her on for 2.5 years. They retrained her, they repositioned her, and it didn't stop. And so we have seen Emirates in crisis mode, and they are the best.
This is a very interesting case because also I can relate this to some research that I included in the book that states that when you treat employees, for example, in this case, in a compassionate way, this means that but this compassion. Compassion is understanding how people think, understanding how people feel, connecting to them on a cognitive level and on an emotional level, and also try to support them as much as possible when this is adequate. And this aligns perfectly with this case. So when you treat people in a compassionate way, they don't only feel supported by this company, but also they feel that the whole workplace, the whole work environment is supportive, and they have a positive association on their minds with this company. This company is compassionate. They are not only treating me in a compassionate way. The workplace is compassionate, and the whole organization is compassionate. What bring about a positive image of this organization. And obviously, this also affect employees in a very positive way, in a way that they feel understood, they feel supported. They can self-soothe also when they have some challenges, for example, health challenges. They can self-soothe and go through stressful situation in a much easier way, a much more effortless way. And this is quite important because this type of employees that are treated in a supportive way, they are also prone to leave, for example, in the current era, positive reviews on some social media platforms such as Glassdoor, where employees can leave positive or negative comments about the company. And this company tend to become a magnet to attract more talented people. So this means that companies that I want to mention because it's a very good example, companies that are compassionate, this means that are human oriented, that put the human being as the priority over the other resources, then also to have not only becoming a magnet for talented people, but also tend to have a better brand image. And better brand image that has very positive repercussions. For example, they tend to attract much more high quality investment. And also they tend to be spotted by the media in a very positive way. This means because, and even by sensationalistic media, media in general, they tend to focus on the negative example, but when they find a company that is standing out from the rest in a positive way, this company has a free promotion, what we call publicity. They tend to be in the media as the example for other companies to emulate in that sector and across sectors. So this is an interesting example. So this means that, to summarize, being human-oriented is not only helping the stakeholders, like your case that you felt and your wife very supportive, you felt very supportive during those challenging times on a mental, emotional, and physical way, but also this bring about a positive ripple effects on other aspects related to the company, such as external investment, high quality, but also this company tend to be follow also what we call in marketing conscious customer that did not only look for high quality product, affordable product, but they look for product from company that make a positive difference or make a positive impact on the world. This means that this customer can decide with their wallets when they purchase a product or a service, and they tend to prefer company that have not only they're successful economically speaking, but also they're socially impactful and environmental impact.
I had a different experience with another company. And after I left Emirates Airline, I started to do consulting. And I was called into one company to have a look at its operations and try to figure out why it wasn't profitable. So I met with the owners, I met with the employees, and as I walked around the office, which was a sales driven office, there was something missing. And at first, I couldn't really figure out what was missing. Like the people were there and there was all these lovely words about culture, but they weren't making money. And so I asked the owner, I said, would I be able to use your bathroom, please? He said, sure, it's over there. I went into the bathroom and I closed the door and I turned around and I looked on the back of the bathroom door and it said, remember your non-disclosure agreements. There is to be no conversations about money in this business. Yeah, that was the same reaction. I think, I get it. I get it. What I was looking for in a sales-driven office were the targets. There was no financial KPIs. There was no dollar figures. There was no measurement of how close they were or if they had gone beyond this dollar figure. There was no conversation about money whatsoever. It was taboo. It was haram. It was forbidden. And there was a non-disclosure that nobody was allowed to talk about commissions and money. And I said to the owner, when I sat down at his desk, I said, you've got a problem with money. And that's why I'm here. And I said, I think I've figured out the problem already. And he said, what? I said, nobody's allowed to talk about money in this office. I said, I've walked around here. There's no sales targets. There's no revenue figures. There's nothing. And on the back of the toilet door, it says, you're not allowed to talk about money. I said, who set that rule? Of course, he did. And he looked at me and he said, shit. And I said, what's the problem? He said, it's my mother. I said, your mother's the problem. He said, I grew up in a house and I was never allowed to talk about money. And he says, I never have financial conversations with my team members. It's forbidden. And I said, well, we've got to start to learn how to have conversations about money. And once he started to have those money conversations, there was no more information withheld from his team members. These people who were intelligent people who were brought in to make money for the business weren't allowed to talk about money, and they had these $1 million ideas. And so once we removed that blockage and they were able to talk about money, they come up with these $1 million ideas. And very quickly, the business started to make a profit rather than being in the red consistently. But it was taboo. It was forbidden. It was haram. It was a jailable offense in his business.
Yes, but you introduce the change, you introduce positive change, and it's very common to see in other ways example of companies that are driven by fear. In this case, in the example that you gave was the fear of talking about money. And when you have fear-driven environments, what you expect? you expect people to be productive? Of course not. They will be stressed. They will be uh, probably feeling threatened by, uh, for example, by colleagues or by managers. Try not to break the rules or try not to suggest anything innovative because we'll be thinking about outside the box, or try not to rock the boat, suggesting new ideas. Instead, when you release the fear and you try to introduce and to develop an environment of trust and support and compassion and kindness, the opposite happens. This means that people tend to share their ideas, like the case that you mentioned, try to propose innovative products to be developed or new services or work jointly or do some brainstorming and discuss the current state of affairs to see can be changed or improved. So yes, fear is very negative, but many companies are fear driven because they believe that fear will keep people in check. The people monitor or control, but it's the opposite happen because people don't want to be micromanaged. People are not naughty children that need to be told whatever they have to do. People are autonomous. They want to be, for example, given tasks and they appreciate delegation. They appreciate when people trust them and acknowledge their skills and really trust them and confide in them. And
Mm.
I saw the shift in the example that you gave me from fear driven regarding money comments to much more open to ideas, to innovative insight, and so on.
Mm. I've learned there's four common fears that exist, and all high performers have these fears. And as long as they're aware of these fears and they learn how to regulate them and have conversations around them, I believe it leads to better performance. And the first fear is when we're approaching results, people have a fear of being taken advantage of. And if we can talk about that openly and learn how to regulate it, it leads to a lot better performance. Because a lot of business owners, they're great at getting results. But then what they're not so good at doing is delegating actions and tasks to other people because they're afraid that they might be taken advantage of. And that fear of I might be taken advantage of also shows up in not training people. And what I've heard over the years is business owners say, well, what if I train them and then they leave? What if they take my information and work for another company? What if they start up in opposition against me? And I always ask them a question: what if you train them? What if you don't train them and then they stay?
It's worse.
It's worse. And that's the fear of the business owner, and they've got to learn to manage that. Secondly, it's the fear of rejection. And everybody has an idea. It's like my accountant. He might have a lot of ideas on how I can save money in a business. And that's just as important as new ideas on how I can make money because there's a ton of businesses out there and they're bringing in millions of dollars every year and they go bankrupt. So you've got to learn to make it and you've got to learn to keep it. But if that fear of rejection is there and the culture creates criticism around new ideas, people won't speak up. And so we've got to be able to talk about that and get around that fear. The third fear is losing stability. And a lot of business owners act really quickly. They act first and think later. But there's other people who think first and act later. And a lot of business owners say, you're thinking too slow. But we need to position those people in the business because they're often more risk averse and they think through things and they say, well, if we just spend 10 minutes in planning, we'll probably save 100 minutes in execution. But the business owners often go, 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 act, act, act. And so what happens is they fear losing their stability. And then they think to themselves, well, if I confront the boss or if I come up with a new idea or I challenge the system, I might lose my job. So I'm just going to zip it and I'm going to fly under the radar. We've got to get that fear out of the way so people can start to communicate. And then the fourth fear is the fear of making a mistake. And a lot of entrepreneurs bang themselves on the chest. I have no fear of making a mistake. I'm going to jump off the mountain and I'm going to build the wings on the way down. Well, it works every now and then. And if it does, good for you. But most of the time, things in businesses don't work. Most ideas don't work. But a business owner who is overly fearless makes too many mistakes. And it's hard to scale and grow the business. Then we've got other people who are more risk averse, like the lawyers in the world, who say you should be aware of the laws and the rules and the regulations before you enter this market, because there's going to be barriers and obstacles that you've got to get around. So you should have a healthy relationship with the fear of making a mistake. Why make a mistake if we can learn how to avoid it? If somebody else has made the mistake before us, let's learn from them, because every mistake is an opportunity to learn, but it also holds us back. And so these are the four fears: the fear of being taken advantage of, the fear of rejection, the fear of losing stability, and the fear of making a mistake. They're normal, natural human fears, but we have to bring them to the surface. We have to learn how to deal with them so the company can grow holistically.
I agree completely. I want to talk a bit more about the last one, that is the fear of making mistakes. How can you innovate if you have fear of making mistakes? Because real innovation is a process of trial and error. You won't
Mm,
get the right product if you're innovating or developing a new version of packaging or a new model for your product or new technology. It's very unlikely that you will get this right just from the start. It's a trial and error. There are many cases of companies that have tested hundreds of prototypes until they got the right one according to the customer needs and preferences. So this means that if you are not experimental, if you are not exploring different solutions because you are fearful that they might not work, well, all innovation is subject to uncertainty. To
mm,
uncertainty, will this work out or not? Will this be the right tools or resources that we're using or not? Well, it's a trial and error process, and people should be confident with this process and learn from mistakes. They know that the
mm,
mistakes are necessary and they're the stepping stone to a potential future success. But if you don't go through this mistake, you will never get any successful product. So
mm,
I like the comment that you mentioned about the fears, and I like the classification of the fears. I have a slightly different one, but it's very aligned with yours. And the idea is that fear is always hindering any type of progress, and it's important to acknowledge that we have this type of fear when we're working for a company, or, for example, we are leading a company, because if not, the fear still is there and is underground. So this means that
mm.
it's affecting our decision, it's affecting our approach on business, it's affecting our business model and how we interact with different stakeholders, and is generally detrimental.
Mm. I was an Australian champion athlete in the sport of wakeboarding. And for 10 years, I trained and I competed. And one of my biggest obstacles was a fear of making a mistake. It was a fear of making a mistake, doing the trick, and then injuring myself. And at the start, I really didn't know how to articulate this fear. It was within me, but I couldn't externalize it. One, I didn't want to look weak. I didn't want to look soft around the other people. I didn't want to say, I'm afraid to try and fail. But I also had a healthy sense of reality that I saw many people wanting to do a particular trick. And there was a theme in my mind that just because you want to, it doesn't mean you can. And so what that meant was is that I might be able to go out and do a trick, but I've been training for 5 years to get to that level of doing this trick, and I make it look easy. So any beginner rider goes, "Oh wow, you make that trick look so easy," but they forget that I've been preparing for 5 years. And they go out, they try it, they don't have the foundations in place, they crash, and they injure themselves significantly. They could tear a ligament, they could break a bone, they could dislocate part of their body. And I would always say to the people that I was coaching, you've got to understand your limits. Just because you want to do this trick today, it doesn't mean you can. You're starting from here and you've got to get these foundations in place. Because if you go out there and hurt yourself, you might set yourself back 2 or 3 years. And so I'm always mindful of going too big too soon because I've seen that in my sport that people who could have been very good wipe themselves out too early. And so developing a healthy relationship with fear of making a mistake is also learning how to fail graciously. And in the sport of wakeboarding, we knew that on competition day, we could do 10 tricks, five going up this way, five coming back the other way. But if you made a mistake, you had to fall in a way that it looked like part of your routine. You had to fall in a way that people went, oh, wow, that was really cool. And then you got to be able to get back up. And so to get to that point, what we did in sport was we would always document everything that we did. And the documentation came with a video camera. So we would go and train for 2 hours and we would do 2 hours of filming so that when we got it right, we knew exactly what we had done. And a lot of businesses, they get it right, but they've never documented it. And so they find it really hard to repeat it. And it feels like that beginner's luck. And in business, oftentimes people can get successful in a good market when everything's going right, but they get this feeling of being an imposter. It's like if anybody figured out that this is just luck, I'd lose everything. So we always documented what we did because if I did it once and I could look at the process, I could do it again, but I could also teach it to somebody else. And that's important in business because if you can teach it to somebody else, you can scale your business. The second thing with documentation was that I could also look back on the attempts that I made. Now, I might not have got the trick, but I might have got 70% there. I might have got 90% of the way there. And if I rewound the tape, I could look at all the things that I'd done right. And oftentimes you can do 4 out of 5 things right and not get the win. But if you can go back and find that one thing that prevented you from doing the trick, you can just fix that area of your performance. It might be the takeoff, it might be the landing, whatever it is, but you've documented it. So you go back and you work on that, and all of a sudden you get that, and the whole trick comes together. But you've documented it. So you're not trying to relearn everything every single time. It's just like, okay, here's 5 steps. That one, there's the problem. Let's solve that. And so I had to learn a healthy interaction with the fear of making mistakes. It came with learning to fall graciously and to get back up, but also not to put myself out there in dangerous waters where I'd get injured and I might have to have a year or 2 off because of a surgery. And I'd done that. I didn't learn the importance of stretching. So in 1998, I ruptured my posterior cruciate ligament. And the problem was I never learned stretching, but I ruptured a ligament and I had to have the ligament removed. And I lost a year. I was a year in rehabilitation. The next year I was given good advice and I didn't listen to it and I still didn't stretch. The next year I ruptured the cartilage in my knee, had it removed. I had another year off the water. So now I'm 2 years behind everybody else. But it came back to one important thing, which was stretching. So in the next 7 years of my career, I made stretching a priority. And eventually, once I mastered that, all other areas improved, and I finally got the big win.
Very interesting. Thank you for the story. Very interesting. Well, this is a story of evolution and personal development and growth and learning process, which is so important for personal development, but also for business growth.
We've got to grow. And as the business changes, we have to evolve as individuals. I know as a consultant, my mentor always said, Daniel, in your business, apply the Pareto principle. He said 80% of the things that you do today, 80% of the products and services that you're selling today, there will be no market for it in 5 to 10 years. So he said this is the importance of constant innovation. So over the years, for me, when I started consulting and coaching in 2010, I used to use paper-based equipment to do psychological profiling. And it was pen and paper. And I would go into a business, and some of this profiling took 2.5 hours to do. By 2016, no business was prepared to pay for that. So the new profiling technology was now online. So what I'd do is I would send these assessments to my clients in advance, and then on the call, I could tell them everything that they needed to know. And that accelerated. Today, those products still exist, but the technology that I use in my voice to profile people is now voice recognition technology. So we're doing vocal health screenings to analyze people. That takes 90 seconds. So my business over the years has rapidly changed, and those products of the past have constantly been reinvented. But a lot of the people who refused change, if those people who didn't know how to deal with innovation, they got stuck and all of their businesses failed. Their businesses are still back in 2010. My business is out there in 2035. And it's that constant innovation. And we've got to innovate ourselves. We've got to innovate the business. We've got to invest in the people, because what if we don't invest in them and they stay? Versus what if we do invest in them and they stay? I think the latter is much more important.
Totally agree. Yes, you invest in people, you are investing in the future, because people are the one that bring about a positive future for your company.
Absolutely. Dr. Bruno, thank you for joining us today. Where can our audience learn more about what you do and the books that you're writing?
Okay, well, my latest book is The Art of Compassionate Business, published by Routledge. It's a white cover. You can find this book on any bookshop, offline or online, for example, Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, also for any other bookshop. And this book includes hundreds of examples of companies that act in a compassionate way from different sectors, from different countries, and has different topics such as generosity, gratitude, compassion, and other aspects, how they affect the workplace, the relationship with customers, the relationship with suppliers, with other stakeholders, with the community. And they can find me on my website, for example, www.brunocignacco.com, Cignacco with double C at the end. Or they can find me on LinkedIn, that I generally post some articles and interviews on LinkedIn. It's easy to find me on LinkedIn.
Lovely. Dr. Bruno, thank you for your time.
Thank you very
Good
much.
morning.
Thank you, Dana.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.